quite an adventure. I'm from the Midwest, but I would come out here to speak, and whenever I was out here, I was just like record a bunch of shows because everybody's here. It just
Yeah.
seemed, and it's nice, the ocean and all the vibes and the opportunities, and it was just really, and so many friends were just like, come out to LA, come, it's gonna be amazing, come out. And then I come out, and the first portion, I moved here in 2019, towards the end of 2019, and I was wrapping up my latest book the entire time, Eat Smarter. I turned it in, then I shared this with you. 2 days later, I got injured
Oh yeah.
because it's a book-related injury, by the way. It's just not healthy writing a health book. And I really was on top of everything from my last book. Like, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. It's just an incredible amount of time, being on the screen.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I finished the rehab, and then the world shut down.
Hmm.
I really feel like the world joined me in a sense,
Hmm.
because when there's so much happening and you're kind of you're slowed down, it seems as though you're missing out. You really have that. And I'm not that kind of. I'm very good with FOMO. Like, I'm more of a mofo than a FOMO.
Yeah.
No, but seriously, the joy of missing out. I'm much more that kind of guy. But just with all the things that were happening in the world and seeing the world kind of moving around me, it's very challenging. But then suddenly everyone joined me, and I'm just like, this is nothing. Like, I've been in the house laid up all this time.
I feel like it's changed the general temperament of. This is probably just me projecting my experience to anyone listening to this, but it's changed my general temperament or relationship to FOMO, where I do really care much less about what's happening out in the world. I've like become habituated to be like, cool, Friday, don't care.
Right.
You know? Doesn't matter. There's
Yeah.
nothing going on.
Yeah.
You know.
I can totally identify with that. And also, I think it's been a trend of folks kind of losing track of days, like all of these
Yeah.
things. So this brings up to the surface for me, like all the socially accepted norms that we have,
Hmm.
like this day is that day, you got this going on this time of day. And that's simultaneous with all of this science coming out about circadian medicine,
Sure.
and how we are kind of synced up or acclimated. We have a certain, with the diurnal and nocturnal patterns of the world, that's more real than the superficial stuff that we just make up,
Hmm.
like daylight savings time, for example,
Yeah.
which a little fun fact, whenever that circles around and that hour is pulled away, that Monday, there's a dramatic increase in traffic accidents, heart attacks,
Hmm.
it's just like, after this amount of time of seeing these trends, why aren't we just looking at like, is this really a smart thing to do?
Yeah.
Let's just mess up everybody's circadian clock in our country, except shout out to Arizona and Hawaii, for being a little bit more evolved. If folks want to look into research out of the Salk Institute, it's phenomenal. It's just getting back to things that our ancestors already knew,
Hmm.
that we're deeply, intimately connected with all of life, but we can we're so smart, we can try to manufacture whatever time of day we want, in a sense,
Sure.
So, but how am I doing through it? For that first portion, I just got to work in the research and looking at what's really happening underneath the surface, because it's another thing folks should know at this point. What's actually happening isn't what you see happening.
Hmm.
The problem right now is that the problem isn't the problem.
Hmm.
The real problem isn't actually getting addressed or getting looked at. It's kind of the same trend. And, I just feel like, for myself personally, this has been a great opportunity, because I think you and I both know we can get very comfortable, especially in our bubbles. Like you just mentioned,
Yeah.
we can create our own existence. And then we tend to see the rest of the world in that same way until we maybe go out to a Walmart or whatever, and then we're just like, what is this?
Yeah, it's shocking.
Yeah, the world it can be different, but for me, it's just there was a fire was reignited. Not to say that it, died off, but it's a new fire, and really understanding how, I want to say the right word here, but I'm conjuring memories of the television show Lost,
Hmm.
It's just a big four-letter word. We're really lost as a species right now. Like with all of our so-called advances, and yet with where we are as a species, as far as our advances, as far as our place in our evolutionary picture, as far as our technology, you would think we'd really, at this point, we'd have a thriving system of health, physical and mental health. But it's this paradox. It's the complete opposite.
Mm.
We're the sickest nation in the history of the world.
Mm.
You know, simultaneously, it's a very interesting time. So it rekindled this fire of like, what's happening in the world right now isn't just this. It's been something that's been a ticking time bomb, you know, and just waiting for something to just, you know, lights it on fire,
Yeah.
as Adam Sandler would say.
The one thing I want to challenge or play devil's advocate with, which is the thing we were talking about before, of how we are at least partially responsible for painting our realities, and we do have some level of sovereignty or capacity to inform and change, you know, or manipulate the world around us with our perception. You know, so when you meet someone, if you perceive them as being, you know, this is like racism stuff. Oh, they're a Puerto Rican, that means this. Oh, they're a woman, that means this. They're a black person, they're a white person. And you start to almost, by projecting your belief on who they are, it starts to kind of drive their consciousness. Might be too like metaphysical, deep way of saying it, but it changes the way that they show up. And I wonder if perhaps in continuing to recapitulate the idea that we are the sickest culture, which objectively, statistically, you can see like, well, correct. And I wonder if, you know, words have power, you know, and abracadabra and casting spells and, you know, perpetuating belief systems. And that's a very out there, like eat a pile of mushrooms and have conversations like that.
Because this is what needs to happen ultimately, Aaron, is a marriage of the two, because you're right. Is a marriage of the two. Because
Exactly.
being this objective thing and this subjective measurement.
Yeah.
And so me as a person, like even the way that I show up is to challenge those stereotypical perceptions or norms. You know, I've been in this field for 20 years. I was just with, Andrew Huberman the other day, Dr. Andrew
he's a buddy.
Huberman, Stanford, the whole thing. There isn't a place really that I've seen, as far as like the folks who are out there really making big waves, that haven't been impacted by my work.
Yeah.
You know, it's very strange, and like folks send pictures of my book being in a doctor's office or whatever the case might be.
Yeah,
but when people see me walking down the street, they're not like, oh, that's a fucking scientist, right? Because I'm different. I'm showing up different. All the stereotypes, like I could pick like 5 of those, and so having that understanding about perception and helping to shatter those things. But the point being, in this instance, I went through a phase of all this love and just seeing that everywhere, even in the sickness. Like there's just so much beauty and all these things, and seeing the joy, but also within there's opportunity. But at some point, you also have to deal with the real world, because you can get so airy-fairy, you're no earthly good.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but most people are so solid, they don't ever venture into that domain. They're so stuck in the reality or the problem or perception of all the bad shit that's going on in the world.
Yeah.
And so, but then we can venture into a place where it's all love and everything is beautiful and good, and we can exist in either of these realities. They're both real, especially for the individual. What I feel to be an ultimate place, and I feel like I'm not putting myself in that category, but some of the great teachers that we still talk about today, is understanding we want to be in the world but not of the world, kind of thing. Like be very clear about the problems and the suffering, because especially for me, like I have children, and so the amount of suffering that I see with children right now is part of the big reason why I do what I do. So to be very aware of that suffering, but also to operate from a place of compassion and love, and to know even within that, this is where we get into things that can be very difficult for people to really to accept or to understand, is that even within that suffering for that child, that could be their assignment. That could be a gift.
Yep.
Because a lot of people are throwing this statement around about hard times making tough
Yeah, right.
men, and tough men
Right.
making good times, and good times making soft men, and then that whole
Sure.
cycle. I really feel like what's happening right now is this generation's opportunity to become better. So I can see that as well. Like, all of these things exist, and I think that ultimately, if we can get to a place where we can jump and pop around at different perspectives and not get too stuck on any one of them,
Yeah.
I think we'll be not just easier to communicate with other people, but better able to enjoy the buffet of life ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think that, one, I would consider you one of the great teachers. And, I really appreciate the work that you do and the way that you present it and the fact that you show up as you are, which makes your message and your medium of communication more digestible.
Thank you.
So I appreciate that. And where I think things get, I've been going back and forth. I've been noticing this pop up in multiple conversations, but just like what consciousness is, how much sovereignty do you really have over your choices? And before you came over here, I was watching have you ever heard of the zombie wasp, also known as the jewel wasp? So the zombie wasp, there's various different instances of this, but essentially it's like, creatures hypnotizing and brainwashing other creatures to have their will upon them. This is zombie wasp. People look up YouTube. It's got like 10 million views or something. It injects some venom into cockroaches, and then the cockroach becomes very docile and just stupid. It like stupefies it, and then the wasp can bring the cockroach. It essentially like takes its little wasp hand to the little cockroach hand, like brings it into its burrow, and then it injects the wasp's eggs into the cockroach, and then the eggs digest the intestines and such organ meat of the cockroach. And it becomes this hypnotized, stupefied, zombie essentially,
Wow.
to carry out the will of the wasp. And then my mind, starts going directions of like, oh, interesting. Like, I wonder if there's any levels of that happening in our own culture, and we're peeled to our news feed and our social media and like, Social Dilemma documentary and all that. Like our minds are so, manipulated.
Yeah.
And so it's something that I think of, and then where the conversation comes in you, I'd be curious your thoughts on that in general, but how that affects us at a hormonal level, and how that affects our immune system, and how that affects the production of our cells. Have you thought about that? I know that's some out there shit.
Wow, the zombie wasp. That's news to me.
Okay.
That reminds me, I just saw Dune, the remake of Dune, and there's a certain guild of person that's able to basically impose their will, to tap into your own mind, to become your inner voice, and to command you to do certain things, right? And so this was just last night when I saw this. And even when I saw that, I was like, that is a thing. It's not just like pulled out of the air. Like, people are able to do that in some level.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get into the domain of like, what about, we know there's an entire field of hypnotism, and there's so much diversity in what that looks like, And it's long ago. This isn't even just new. It's just much easier to tap into this in other folks. Long ago, folks figured out how to get that to bypass your executive brain, the part of your brain that questions things, that distinguishes between right and wrong, and has social control. You can bypass that and get right to the subconscious. And having that ability, let me paint a better picture here. We think that we're operating from our conscious perception about stuff. But what's really coming out is a result of an entire lifetime and many other lifetimes. Not talking about like reincarnation, but all of the different moments in our lives have thousands of different dynamics.
Yeah.
And so all of these subconscious and unconscious things come out for us on the what we deem to be the surface in our reality. But most of the stuff is happening behind the scenes. And what's happening behind the scenes is really governing our choices and our responses. Because right now, I might be looking at this cup and I know that you got the lemon ginger here for me. And I might have had an experience with some ginger back when I was 6 years old that's kind of influencing my perception about having this ginger. You know, maybe it was I don't know, my grandmother really loved me. She gave me some ginger tea or something. Or, maybe my grandmother was a bit of a zombie wasp and she like splashed hot ginger tea all over my lap or some shit.
Yeah.
Like these things are coloring our experience no matter what. So with that said, people figured out how to bypass, humans have, that conscious, that the conscious influence and get right to the subconscious to influence the way that you think, to influence your responses. And we've learned to do it in so many ways. So we could do it with the word, we could do it with sound. This is very well known that a certain tempo, a certain way of structuring sounds and beats and music have been purposefully used to drive in messages deeper into the subconscious. That could take you down a whole rabbit hole looking into that. So being mindful of what you're listening to. But I also do want to leave this caveat. I believe that something about us, which I think we don't give it enough credence because we try to like label it this the spirit, my soul. It's so expansive, like we don't even really understand. I believe that there's a safeguard, there's a safety, there's a space within us that is untouchable for all these things. And I feel that it can expand or it can contract. And how you work on yourself, growing that intentionally, can help to buffer when those types of influences you might not even be aware of, when they come up, you have that space. And if that space is grown within you, like the stuff, you really just kind of shake it off, where others might fall victim to it. So I believe that that's kind of the safety valve, or like the the break glass emergency thing. If you're worried about like, should I not listen to DMX? He just died. Is that message, is it getting deep into my subconscious? If you've worked on yourself and you've grown that space, you can be aware of the influence. Like, oh, I see what that is. Okay. And you get to choose every single microsecond, your response, your perception, what you were really talking about earlier. Like, you get to decide. But most people in our culture, unfortunately, we're not taught these things. And I know that because I was that. I just thought I was my thoughts my entire life until there was a break that took place. I was just existing. I was operating on automatic. If something happens, I'm reactive to all things in my environment. I didn't have a concept of I get to decide how I want to feel. I get to choose how I want to feel. Like, I didn't know that was a thing. And so most people are living their existence like that. And we're indoctrinated from a very early age in our culture, unfortunately, to outsource our thinking and to outsource our feeling to the world around us. So yeah. And as far as the immune system, hormones, all that stuff, if we break down what a hormone is, it really is, it's like a chemical messenger that is sending metabolic DMs from cell to cell. All right, so like little metabolic text messages or emails. And what we want the email, we want to have a good email service where the message is getting wherever it's supposed to go accurately, and it's not getting whitelisted, it's getting whitelisted, it's not going to spam. If we want this certain hormonal communication to go accurately. We also want to make sure we don't have a mistake. We're sending out, like, we got a big email to send out and the headline's fucked up.
Yeah.
You're trying to send out a message to, be peaceful and healthy. And instead, it says, be peaceful and stealthy. And so now you're just like being a fucking ninja and snooping around on people and trying to, hide out and scare folks or whatever, like it's going to instruct your cells on what they should be doing. This is kind of um, like the Paul Revere type vibe of like, informing all your cells on what they need to do. There's something going on in the world. This is how we need to respond or act in this condition. And so if we have a perception where we are victimized, where we feel like we're a victim or at the mercy of what's happening in the world around us, the hormone we get to choose the hormones we're producing as well, to a massive magnitude. And so this gets back to feeling how you want to feel, choosing how you want to feel. And so if I'm having a detracting, disempowering feeling state or thought about what's happening in the world or myself, it's that chemistry is getting communicated to every. This is the point I want everybody to understand. Every cell in your body, not just your heart that might be fluttering or your muscles that might be tensing up or whatever. Literally from your fucking toenail to your super chiasmatic nucleus. Like everything in your body is getting affected by every thought you think. Every thought you think has correlating chemistry in your body. Now, this is beautiful, but also can be terrifying because just like, well, I want to think the right stuff all the time. It's not about that. It's about growing yourself, working on yourself, that inner space to where it's just on automatic. So you can more ebb and flow with the stuff that happens in the world. And also, I'm so grateful for this. And I've been highlighting these folks for quite some time, like the work of Susan David, Dr. Susan David, to really clarify that our emotions, none of them are bad. Like if you're depressed, if you're angry, if you're hurt, whatever the case might be, our problem in our culture is that we run from these things. We don't listen to the message it's trying to share with us. Our body is it's beyond intelligent. Our brains are beyond intelligent, beyond anything we can understand. And so now our feelings have become conditions, diagnosable conditions. And there's a drug for each of them, well, not yet, but they're working on it. And so really being able to understand that whatever the feeling is, what is this message trying to teach me? Or what is this, I don't want to leave this out, by the way. So I mentioned hormones. Neurotransmitters are very similar, but they're operating with the nervous system. Okay, so neurotransmitters, neuropeptides, our hormones are operating with our endocrine system, so our hormonal system, the hormone-related glands and cells. And so very similar as far as their communication aspect. But, last point here, just to summarize everything, our emotions are incredibly valuable feedback. Number one, they will happen. They will happen automatically in response. It's kind of like the wind blowing right now. We can't do shit about that. It's happening. Like, now we can harness the wind though, if we wanted to. We could jump on and or we can go and kite surf in that shit. Like we can use it to our advantage and find the joy in it. Or we can just we can let it knock us down and we can stay there and that's okay. Both are okay, right? So number one, it's just going to happen. Number two, you have complete authority to decide the feeling as well. Complete authority. And I'm not talking about lying to yourself either. We have the capacity to change our state, to change the way that we feel, because every thought we have changes our chemistry. And so now it's being able to, again, today is about marriage for some reason, being able to marry these two things together so there's a good balance where you're not so forcing yourself to feel a certain way all the time, which is not human necessarily. And you're not at the mercy of the environment around you and all the stuff going on in the world, where you can still be in the world and feel the feelings, get that feedback, but you still maintain your sovereignty.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a balance of, Eastern philosophy and Western allopathic medicine, or, Western analytical thinking, Roman times, right angles, all this not very pagan, circular, naturalistic type stuff. Like both are valuable, and so in this conversation of, you are the captain of your ship, you're engineering your body through your mind in part. That's half of the conversation. And then there's the other part of the conversation where it's like, and, arsenic has an effect on your digestive system, and it's like, but then you can go to Southern Baptist churches and they're, maybe they're getting bit by rattlesnakes and the Holy Spirit's, perfusing their cells, and it's like protecting them, and then it's also like, well, maybe amazing. Now, maybe let's stop getting bit by rattlesnakes. Let's get some green juice, So I think it's just the balance of both. And I think that like the scientists of the world, they can be condescending towards maybe like the people that are, they just want to, instead of studying the dynamics of flipping a dirt bike, or, whatever the skateboard kickflip, they just want to go do a kickflip. Science, and then the people just doing the kickflip, like, science, they're in their laboratory. It's like, no, like marriage, you bring them together. Now we have, a superpower. We can really create change.
That's it.
In relation to more stuff, the general theme of what I was excited to talk to you about was kind of how we do inform our physiology with our thoughts and feelings, and, the general blanket of fear that has perfused a lot of people's TV screens, at least, and social media feeds.
Right. Yeah.
And one of the things I was looking into that was interesting was multiple personality disorders. And you can actually, there's been tons of research around this. People with multiple personality disorder can change the shape of their eyeballs. They can become colorblind. They can have rashes. They can have burns. Diabetes, like you can have a water-filled pustule manifest as a product of the belief that you're allergic to orange juice or whatever the thing, and then suddenly you turn it into Timmy, and the water-filled pustule gets reabsorbed and goes back into Timmy, not allergic to orange juice guy. Crazy.
Listen, we're so weird. We are, man. We're so weird. And one of the things I've been dealing with recently too is just like how we limit ourselves. Like even with examples like that, how we're designed, how the universe is designed, it doesn't care about speed. Like with healing, like that's your belief based on the perception that we've been given, and just kind of, historical records, whatever, and that has some credence. But things can happen like so much faster than we realize. And I really feel that that's a product too of getting in alignment. That person, there is no doubt in them that they are Timmy. All right, Timmy. They're Timmy. That's the thing. How quickly can you get to yourself to the place where you have no doubt whatsoever that you no longer have, fill in the blank. How quickly can you get yourself to the place where you your meniscus is healed, fully, like it is done. Like that's how powerful we are, because again, your thoughts, and this is another interesting thing too. I've been talking, and I'm so grateful for these wonderful people, Dr. Caroline Leaf.
Oh yeah, I've had her on.
Yeah, she's another one of those people, again, like I had no idea of the intersection that I had in her life, and in hers and mine. She actually, it was the one book that I read together with my daughter like 12 years ago. It was like her first book, I think. And my daughter was like, you got to read this book. And so she was already in my life. But anyways, one of the things that she's been really working to get out into popular culture is the law, really, that, because we tend to think our mind and our brain are the same thing, but the fact that your mind creates your brain, right? So your mind is not your brain. It is an outcome of your brain. Your entire physiology is an outcome of your mind. I'm sorry. And so the process of thinking creates the brain itself. So we get to choose the thoughts again. So, which is pretty cool. Now, with that said, I mean, right now, especially with all that's going on in the world, which the thing is, even as I say that too, to keep it in context, there's always been crazy stuff going on, all kinds of stuff going on. But you mentioned earlier that we are in a time now where we're being force fed a lot of fear, but that's been going on forever as well. It's been a tool utilized back with kingdoms and and knights and, tribes and all these things to control. Fear is a very powerful modulator of emotion, because if you're in fear of some imminent threat, there's something, and you know that I can help to make sure that you're okay. Guess what? Like, I mean, imminent threat, like you might die, your children might die, and I have safety for you. You're gonna listen to me a whole lot easier,
Yeah.
you know. And so it's a powerful tool, because this is getting back to basic human physiology, psychology, you know, and also these things change our state. But, to circle all this together with this work and understand that your mind is creating your brain, your mind is creating your physiology, your body. If we really get this and really understand that, let me give, because I gave a affirmative thought before. A negative thought, for example, changes our biochemistry. That thought of fear. All right. This is a great example, because I've got science and proof on this now. When all of this change happened in the world, and things begin to get shut down, I brought up a very rational concern, which is, hey, listen, we've got this entire field of psychoneuroimmunology, psychoneuroendocrinology. We know that our perception of reality is a major controller of our immune system function.
Yeah.
If everybody is being fed 24/7 fear, which again, if you weren't tuned into your phone or the television, or even just stuff going on the street, and you were maybe just, I don't know, hanging out somewhere in, I don't know, Costa Rica or something, and there's this terrible news that comes out on Wednesday, you just think it's fucking Wednesday. You wouldn't know about, like, there's something terrible you need to be afraid of. You're just living your life. Not to say that there isn't something that can be a threat out there, but if we didn't have these things, we wouldn't be so influenced. So anyway, so I pointed out, like, hey, listen, we know that the outcomes from infections and chronic diseases, but our emphasis is on infections, when somebody is in fear or they're in a hyper-stress state, their immune response is dramatically suppressed. We know this, like, the data exists. So I'm like, listen, I get all this stuff is going on, but how things are being handled right now, we're going to have worse outcomes for our citizens because of all the rampant fear without context. That's my issue. It's fear without context. Cut to a year and a half later, the CDC's report comes out, and they tracked 800 U.S. hospitals, over 540,000 COVID patients, and they found that the number one risk factor for death from COVID is obesity, which we knew, but we're not doing anything about it, but we knew. The second leading risk factor for death from COVID-19 in the CDC's report is anxiety and fear-related disorders. Now, I cannot even script something like that. I can't put those words down in such a clear format for people to really understand this. It's a second leading risk factor from the CDC. The second leading risk factor for death is anxiety and fear-related disorders. And chances are, unless you know me, you haven't heard a thing about this, And these things should be utterly shocking, because then you start to piece this together, like, okay, we know that said news organization has literally been caught purposefully using fear and putting a death toll ticker up on the screen purposefully to instill fear. They got caught. The technical director was caught on camera saying that, he would feel like when the number wasn't going up high enough, he was like, we need to get the number up. Like, it's not scary enough. And then he caught himself. He said it on camera. That's not right. Like, I know that that's messed up that I feel like that, but, and then the person asked, like, and this is an idea I put out into the world. All right. I'm sharing this with you. I don't really usually talk about this, but when I first saw it, because I went to my neighbor's house, because I don't have that shit on my TV. And I went to the neighbor's house and I see it, and I'm like, my first glance was like, I thought it was like a stock ticker. And then, like, my attention focused in on it, I'm like, they're tallying up deaths. Like, it's just a number ticking on the screen. Like, that's not okay.
Yeah.
If they really care about humans, those are human lives. And then almost in that same moment, I was like, this is fear without context. If they're going to do that, why not have a recovery ticker as well, a recovery number, so that you can see the 100-time or 1,000, 10,000 time magnitude of people being okay, to give some context. Like, and this brings into the conversation, what can we actually do? How are so many people okay? Then we get into that conversation.
Yeah.
You know, or 90, there's people throw these numbers around. I'm just using this for simplicity's sake, but 99% of folks, how are they okay? What happened? How are they able to survive this thing? You know, like, what happened with their biology that enabled them? Let's talk more about that. But we're so focused on the problem because the problem keeps people in fear, to the degree that once they contract, even if they don't contract said thing, but that fear can make your body respond. I just had was talking about some of this data that your body, just being in stress, you can manufacture a fever.
Sure.
I mean, it's not even that difficult to do. Like, it can happen pretty frequently for folks. And we can manufacture the symptoms of sickness. And your body's doing that because it thinks there's a threat. There's a pathogen, there's something that's trying to attack you, right? And so, yeah, man, I mean, I just want to make that point. Anxiety and fear-related disorders, there's some subsets of that. So we can have it so that, okay, number one, yeah, some people are like, yeah, of course they're in fear. They got the thing, you know? But again, this has been given so much authority over us. It's been framed in such a way that it's 100 times worse than cancer, for example, when in reality it's the reverse, right? So when somebody gets this diagnosis, they feel like they're gonna die. They've been so conditioned that I'm going to have a bad outcome. I'm probably not gonna make it. That's what's gonna happen.
I almost had a panic attack just a month ago. I didn't even have that bad a version of it. You know, I was like day 4 of it. I've had the vid twice, and I haven't been vaccinated. And the second time felt vastly more organic. And we've had, I think, was it Dr. Quam, Dr. Quay. I had Dr. Quay on here, and he was going into all the details of the very high likelihood that it almost absolutely was manufactured in some lab, North Carolina. And
he told me
all that.
1 in 13 million chance it was naturally occurring.
Right, exactly.
You know, he's just a Stanford guy. You know, no big
right.
deal. He was just there in front of Congress, you know, sharing his data. No big deal. Yeah. But when his team reached out, they reached out to me early, like when this was hot. Yeah. And I had already seen things getting censored. Like, I was just like, and we had conversations. I was just trying to find a way I could even put it out.
Right.
You know, like I'm on the, you know, the watch. Not like something really bad, but just certain things that I've created, and I've brought even Bruce Lipton, cell biologist.
Yeah, I've had him on too.
Yeah, he's really impressed upon the culture. The term epigenetics, if you've heard that term, it's largely thanks to him impressing it upon culture today. And I brought him to have a conversation about the biology of fear.
Sure.
You know, because again, I saw it. I was like, let me get this guy, get another Stanford guy, to talk about this. And he was sharing with me how, and he puts a lot into his stuff that he creates, man. He's so joyous. He loves his work so much.
Yeah, he's a sweetie. He's like music.
Yeah. Yeah. And he was like, he was upset because 2 of his videos that he really worked so hard to create were taken down. Like, they got censored. And he just couldn't understand. He's like, I'm not just a scientist. I'm the fucking scientist. Like, where the books are changing and evolving to, where epigenetics is the leading science here. Like, he's like, I've been doing this for 30 years, 40 years. Yeah. You know? And so for that to take place, I was like, oh, wow, something. Because at first when it was happening to folks, I was like, well, maybe they're just not sticking to the data. You know, maybe it's a lot of, you know, interjections and anecdotes and things like that. But I created a piece, and I literally just stuck to peer-reviewed studies, published peer-reviewed studies. That's it. And just a logical summary of them, it was taken down. And I'm just like, that's not okay. That's not what science is or supposed to be. Then we get into the dynamics of like, well, platforms can censor things. It's their platform. But we know now that, unfortunately, as crazy as it sounds, which again, is very difficult for me to, because this is the thing about me too, if I could share, I really believe people are good, man. I really do.
Yep.
I know that there are a couple Michael Myers out there, it's close to Halloween.
But at
right
some
now.
point, the Michael Myers, loved baseball and was scared of spiders and, wanted to kiss a girl and wanted to be an astronaut when they grew up.
Yeah. More than likely,
Yeah.
And something happened. That's the thing. Something happened, whether it is a loss of love or lack of love or some pain inflicted, hurt people. And also, I've really understood more than I ever have this year that people have a very strong tendency to compromise their ethics in order for the, quote, greater good, right? They really do believe that they're helping people when, 2/3 of our, this is crazy to even say this, 2/3 of the United States Congress in 2020 took a check from the pharmaceutical industry. What? I mean, to say that this industry with a proven track record of, the list of felonies is ungodly, right? The fraud, the bribery, the deaths. The EJS Center for Ethics at Harvard University did a really great analysis, which is difficult to find this data because it's not readily tracked by the CDC. But they uncovered that about 200,000 United States citizens die each year from pharmaceutical drugs. 200,000 folks every year, right? And they wrote in the report that the FDA does not acknowledge these facts and instead only accounts for a small percentage of these figures. And this is because, for whatever strange reason, pharmaceutical drugs being a cause of death is not one of the, it's like now things have been changed, like comorbidities, like the way that people are writing, doing coding work has changed with COVID hitting the scenes, and it's taken a precedent over the heart disease that might be a major factor, if not the factor, or whatever the case might be. But when it comes to pharmaceutical drugs, it's so easily passed off. And also, you got to think about the system that's coding the death. Why would you say I killed someone? Like with this, I don't know, lisinopril or whatever the case might be, the Celebrex. So it's a very concerning system where you get to grade your own homework. So for the researchers to really dig around, and again, this is Harvard guys, right? So this is supposed to be the best and the brightest. They're not trying to like mess up the system. They're just looking at the data, and this is what is, And so, being that that's the case, 200,000 folks dying every year, and I was just with a doctor of pharmacy last week, and I specifically talked with her because she got into the business again to help people. And she could see that's what the, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, like that's what you're doing. Like we want to help people. But she's like, once she got her first position, she was like, no exaggeration, every day I got an email for a drug recall, another drug recall, every day, at least one. And she just had the logical question: how are these drugs getting approved in the first place if they keep getting recalled?
Yeah.
And so, prior to having this conversation with her, what took me into this universe, more so than I ever have, which I already knew this because of food more so, our food system with the FDA, Food and Drug Administration. And I went and actually looked at the data on how is this approval taking place, because obviously there's a big approval that has happened recently, or a process of approval, very complex. But this was published in the journal Science, one of the top, literally the journal Science, that after they tracked and saw, because what happens when a drug comes up for review, for approval, the FDA has a board of physicians who will review the drug and approve it. And again, they're not running their own trials. They're taking the pharmaceutical companies' trials. It's grade your own fucking homework, they're not, which science should be, this is one of the things with the study, it should be, you should be able to replicate it. But that never happens. That's part of the reason stuff is the way it is and stuff gets recalled once enough people die or are injured. And so, but anyways, but the review found, because what they did was they looked at post hoc payments between pharmaceutical companies paying this board of physicians on the review board. Now, this is the little catch-22, because it would blatantly be a bribe if they gave them money and then approved the drug. So what they uncovered was that about 40% of the physicians on the FDA review board, they receive post hoc payments. So later, it could be 6 months later, a year later, money from pharmaceutical companies after a review of their drug. All right. So it's just like nothing to see here. This is a year later. It has nothing to do with it. Right. To the tune of literally millions and millions and millions of dollars every year. And so, I'm sorry, not every year, but every time one of these big approval processes is taking place. So about 40% of these folks. So that's strike number 2, with pharmaceutical companies influencing what's getting to our people, our citizens, our community members. And the last piece I'll share here, because I can keep going, is the FDA itself, which is largely funded by pharmaceutical companies to the tune of billions of dollars every year. Pharmaceutical companies are paying the FDA as part of their review board process. The inception of this was to make sure drugs can get to the market faster, to save lives. And so they were like, well, we need more people. We need more resources. You guys start paying us and we'll do it faster. And again, it seemed like a ethical thing, because now we can get drugs to the market faster and save people. But what's actually happened is now, since those changes happened, the drugs that are not approved have tanked. More stuff is approved. We've also seen the biggest epidemics of drugs like opioids. Just since 2000, about 1 million Americans have died from opioids. We've seen the approval of things like that. Clearly something's wrong. But as I'm pointing these things out, it just seems like we still have a long way to go, because it's very logical. There's a problem here with a company, pharmaceutical industry, that makes money from disease and sickness, having so much influence over our government. Like, it's a serious, serious problem. Like, literally, again, 2/3 of our Congress members receive drugs. And this goes to my original point, last thing, is that, again, they're taking that check, the politician, like, hey, I'm going to use this money to do good. I'm going to get into office, and I'm going to help to make change here. Not understanding, pharma just gave you this check.
Yeah.
You're their bitch now. You know, number one. Number two, there's going to be strings attached. There's going to be promises to repay. But ultimately, you know, again, I started by saying this, I believe most people are really good. And so even as you compromise a step at a time, a step at a time, a step at a time, before you know it, your life doesn't match up to the person you say you are. And that's often what we see, the definition of the people in these political positions. It's all so superficial, you know. But again, it didn't start off that way, even for that person, more than likely, you know. And so, yeah, it's a complicated terrain. And the question is, ultimately, how do we change it? And that's what I've been really working on recently.
I'm curious where, from your perception and people listening, just kind of to like marinate on this idea, like where is it like simple greed? You know, the censorship of competition, you know, and you know, potentially sacrificing people's health and their lives for financial gain, and if it is that, you know, or is there something else at play? And if it is that, then like what is the root of that in the first place? You know, you could go back to maybe Genghis Khan, you know, and be like, oh, interesting. Okay, there was some stuff was going on in his mind, you know, and he's not him. He's a product of his environment. He's, you know, part of his mother and father and culture and everything. And maybe you go to like, you know, Napoleon. You know, like, oh, there was something going on there, you know, or Hitler, you know, any of these like, this isn't. There's been a repeat of this, like like power thirst throughout known history. And so I wonder, as far as looking at solutions for that, if there even needs to be a solution. Perhaps that's just the nature of things, and it's like the circle of life, and people are gonna, do things that we deem to be terrible and evil, and that's the way it is. I don't think that's an ideal perception. But what do you think the root of that is in the first place?
Yeah. This goes back to, again, it's a perception, it's a belief, because each of the people that you named, in some form or fashion, they believe they were doing the right thing.
Right.
To get rid of this country or these people, or, to be able to rule over this particular land so that they can do it better and people can have better lives,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or at least their family, right? Some altruism there. And that's hard for us to understand. Now, there has to be a break from compassion. There has to be a psychological dehumanization of a person or a race of people, or whatever the case might be, for you to have that level of vitriol towards that race or that person.
Yep.
And that is taught. That isn't something that we just naturally have. So that gets back to, again, hurt people, and also our conditioning, our programming from our environment, if we're not aware. And I've said this many times, but we are definitely a product of our environment. I know that because that's, where I'm from. I was heading the same direction as my environment. But we are also creators of our environment once we become aware of it. So this threat has always existed, like you mentioned. And today, if we look at, a head of a pharmaceutical company, I encourage everybody to check out Crime of the Century. Have you seen it on HBO Max?
No, actually, no.
So it is really digging in and looking at the opioid epidemic. And it is very unsettling. It's very unsettling. And, behind, you see a smiling face. One of the guys who is in charge of one of the big pharmaceutical companies, he just kind of looks like a jubilant, but then they ask him a certain question. He just kind of clams up, I'm not trying to, killing people. He's detached from that.
Right.
He's looking at the numbers, so there's levels of even when we get into those positions, people start looking at things in terms of numbers, whether it's the industrial prison system. Like, we know there's a certain amount of folks who are in juvenile systems who are going to end up, whether it's 70%, whatever the case might be, in the big boy version of it, right? So it's like a prep school for that shit. And you just run the math. Like, okay, we know 70%, okay, we get in here, and how much money do you get per kid in this system? 50,000, 100,000 a year, whatever it is. You just do the math. These are bad kids, right? You're not thinking about rehabilitation for real. You're not thinking about opportunity. You're not thinking about the conditions that might have created this situation where the kid was trying to, survive. You're not addressing any of that. You know that, this is going to turn over into this. Over here, it's just numbers. And we have a story in our head, bad people, bad kid.
Yeah.
Right? We got to dehumanize them. So humans are very crafty to create these psychological stories to make us right and to make us feel good about the wrong that we do.
Yeah.
And it takes a very courageous person, and I believe we all have this capacity to look at those things and to be willing to be wrong, And here's the craziest shit. Like, when you are willing to be wrong, you end up right a lot more often. Because you're willing to look at all the sides and quickly come to an understanding.
Yep.
And so that's another thing that's taken place this past year and a half. I mean, I've been looking for data to just counter what I'm saying, because I understand I have a bias. We all have our biases, and my bias is towards, which yours is as well. What does my genes expect? What do my cells expect from me to be a healthy human being? Like that, and we're talking about countless centuries and centuries of humanity. What are the things my DNA has been exposed to that have healthy, as Bruce Lipton has brought to us, epigenetic outcomes, right? These influences. And so I understand my bias. When something comes up that doesn't align with that, right? I have a red flag that comes up. But now I could see the flag. And I'm like, my red flag's up, but maybe this new drug, maybe it is fucking amazing. Maybe it goes contra. This long track record of this industry fucking people up. Maybe they're doing something good for a change. I have to put it to the side, open myself up to be wrong, and go and venture into it. And I dig, man. I dig. I really do. I look for, man. It's hard. It's hard because the bad that they are is really bad. Like, it's just coming up for me. For example, Johnson & Johnson. The baby powder thing has happened recently. It's multi-billion-dollar lawsuit settlement, that whole thing.
Yeah.
Man, I used to put baby powder on me.
I was a big nut baby powder guy.
Oh yeah, that's what I'm saying.
That was my shit.
Same thing, man. Same thing.
Yeah.
And
it's one of the delights of life, I think.
You have no idea that you took about 7 months off your life, But here's the thing. So all of these different things are coming out today, which is another beautiful part. Where things have never been really crazier in some instance, but also we learn stuff so much faster. Like, a politician can lie. Like, you might never know, never even hear about it, unless something happens and it's in the local newspaper, or whatever. Today, you can see somebody lying in real time, and then you got the data right here, and I don't like to say the term fact check, but to be able to see, like, oh wait, that's not actually true.
You gotta know when there's misinformation, man.
Man, don't get me started. So, and even that. So here's the thing too. Thank you for saying that, because I'm aware that even when I say the fact check, I still understand that this is still based on a certain data set, and in some contexts, even this isn't right. But what I do, and should be something we all strive to do, is have a simple cost-benefit analysis, or what does the majority of data say, right? I'm a big proponent of results. I'm a very results-oriented person. And so I just look at the results, look at the track record. Johnson & Johnson, for example. They were just ordered to pay part of a $26 billion settlement for their contribution to the opioid epidemic. Right? It's a big chunk of change, but not really. Not for them.
Yeah.
And what is their part? They are the world's largest manufacturer by far of a genetically modified super poppy, narcotics that are used to make opioids. By far. I mean, they are a beast. All right. They are El Chapo. They are, what's the other guy?
I don't know. I started watching Breaking Bad for the first time. That's my first TV show. So my only relationship is like El Tuco or whatever from Breaking Bad. He was a big meth guy.
And it's full disclosure, never saw it.
Never.
I haven't seen it, man.
I haven't. It's my only show.
I know some people are like,
Cut
what,
me some
Shawn?
slack.
You gotta see it.
It started in 2008. I thought it was like from 2019. I was so excited that I was like hip. I was on it.
It happened with me with Game of Thrones. I watched it like maybe 4 seasons into it or something, and everybody's like, But anyway, so that's going on, right? And then the CDC published some data with folks who have a documented opioid abuse condition are over 10 times more likely to die, or I'm sorry, not to die, but to contract COVID-19, right? So it creates somehow, this isn't cause, I'm not talking about causality right now, okay? But this correlation should have us to form a hypothesis, okay, over 10 times, it's not 2 times, all right? It's not even like a little bit of even 5, it's 10 times. There's probably something here. What's the underlying mechanism? And then we see, if we dig around and look at the data, like what's happening with the immune system on opioids. Oh man, it's not good. Go figure, this kind of pro-inflammatory, like this is for pain. And so dealing with this pro-inflammatory condition that might manifest in pain, but what is it doing to our immune cells and immunosenescence and exacerbating our immune cells dying off. That can't be good. So these kind of associations, and then we look at the track record and the efficacy, and the same thing, well, I'm not going to start dropping all these guys' names, but they also paid out a massive healthcare fraud settlement, $2.2 billion, with the Department of Justice, and these things, this is literally, the reason is, or the question should be, why don't we hear more about this? They're the biggest funders of the media as well, major media networks, outside of Vanguard Group and things like that. They're funding the media. They're controlling government policy to a large degree. They're controlling the FDA. We're not getting viable data from these folks.
Right.
And so I have a bias. Like, I know who you are. And if somebody shows you who they are, believe them, everybody's heard that statement, people don't believe. All of a sudden, that's the thing that I had to come to grips with early on. I was just like, okay, guys, we know what's going on. Everybody collectively, we already know, the news is pretty much full of shit. And it's just fear and all this stuff. We all, right?
Yeah, it's theater.
But then, all of a sudden, people's like, not right. We're abandoning logic in our history. And let me just hear what this guy is telling me to do so that I could survive. Fear is so powerful, man.
The thing that comes up for me, and do you have what time do you need to get out of here? And not that I'm if you say you don't have a hard out, I'll keep you here for another 2 hours, but
about 10 minutes.
10 minutes, yeah, cool. So the thing that comes to mind that I think is highly relevant in this conversation is, have you ever heard the concept learned helplessness?
Of course.
So I think that's something that, so essentially learned helplessness is when I think the research that I saw was with dogs. They put dogs on these shock tables, the floor would cause this charge, electrocute them, not kill them, but uncomfortable. And they give one group the opportunity to press this button and it turns the shock off, and then the other group there'd be no button to turn it off, and then with enough time, eventually the dog would just kind of curl up into this fetal position, and then when you present them the opportunity to disengage the shock, they're like, I'm whatever, I'm over it. I'm just in my fetal position, I'm curled up. And I think that a lot of the weight of what's going on, and the general confusion that is rampant throughout culture, at least with myself. Sometimes I question whether I have this passionate neutrality, where I really want to listen to both sides, and I feel like I know that I have
You're
such
in
a
the
deep
alt
bias.
middle.
Yeah, I'm alt middle. Yeah, but within that, I question how much, perhaps a bit of that in myself could be some level of learned helplessness of what the fuck do I actually do with all of this? And so that's, I think, something that's great. You can read all the statistics and studies and determine, bad guy, good guy, whatever the thing. But what do we actually do with it?
That's really the question, man. You do what you're doing right now. People can't see you. You're massaging your feet and you're being Aaron and being awesome and being a joy and a light and a teacher and a facilitator. And that's the best thing that you can do, give your gift, bring some empowerment to folks, because I really do believe every little place where we can get some light in, it eventually can break through, so every little, and I'm thinking about little chinks in the armor or kinks in the armor, and eventually, if we get enough of those things, it's just going to happen faster. So that's the number one thing is being the model. I know a lot of people today feel a little bit cut adrift. It's so crazy. And we talked about this before, I think maybe before we got started, but you can go to the house next door and it's a completely different atmosphere. One house might be in total terror and the next house, it's a party, you know? And now this is I'm bringing this up because the dissonance is happening within families. It's not just this city versus that city or this community versus that community. It's within families where people are more, the political sphere started the ball rolling, and now with COVID, it's become so politicized, and it like comes with a kit. Like if you're in this certain political party of this influence, you have the kit of your particular beliefs. Like it comes with the kit. And we've allowed that to take place over time. How the fuck do we have two parties? Like, what sense does that make? We have hundreds or thousands of different perceptions about said topic. Why you gotta pick one?
Yeah.
It makes no sense, and you have to fold into it. You might be on this side, but then you believe an issue, a difference of this issue, the same thing as the other side. But you can't say it. If you do, you're ousted. You're not part of the party. So we've allowed it to get to this place. So a big part of the solution is understanding the problem. We didn't get here overnight. We've allowed this stuff to simmer underneath the surface, seeing so much suffering, our citizens, so much death, unnecessary death and destruction. And even with that, from where I'm from, a lot of people are hurting other people because they're not well. They don't want to be like that.
Yeah.
I came up in a place where it was very dangerous, even within my own household.
Missouri, right?
Yeah, St. Louis.
Where? St. Louis?
Yeah. But, and little fun fact, St. Louis many times has been the murder capital. We had that distinguished accolade many times. But, but this more so is just a lot of good people. We just make bad decisions because of the nature of where we are, And, the violence even that I see in my household, that I was exposed to, that I experienced, that I was a part of, man, like, if I'm thinking about, like, my stepfather, who right now, he's in an adult daycare. And he can't, he has to be under constant supervision because of crack and really damaging his brain. So he has epilepsy now. He developed epilepsy.
Wow.
And man, but when I tell you, when he was well, when he wasn't doing the drugs, the alcohol, he's one of the most jubilant, happy, joyous people I've ever it was amazing. But I saw that 10% of the time because he was always under this pressure from the environment and had to be a certain way. And he was conditioned in a certain way because his older brothers, one of them died from crack. The second one, he's just freaking Wolverine because he's done more crack than anybody and been stabbed and shot. Shout out to my Uncle Larry. Everybody has an Uncle Larry in some domain, but not he's literally Wolverine. Yeah. But so he was subjected to the abuse and conditioning from them as well. So he had to be tough. But he's a sweet person. He's a sweet human being, So again, if you don't understand the plight of a person in certain conditions, right now we live at a strange time where people are trying to understand it, but then you can create this false compassion,
Yep.
And and then that gets bled out into other issues where I don't want to say the word, the W word. WOKE. Woke.
Oh, the
woke.
Woke culture. That's me.
And I love JP. Our guy JP is like,
sweet.
be awake, not woke.
Yeah,
Where we have this false, today. I'm healthy. I take this drug, so I'm healthy. Or I put this covering on my mouth and my nose. And so I'm protecting others and I'm helping others to be healthy.
The patriot.
With all love and empowerment and respect, actually help somebody. Don't create this illusion where you can passively help somebody and do your part. Actually do your part. Because we're literally masking the issue. We're masking the symptom. And we're not doing the thing of being human and connecting with other humans. And actually, instead of, fearing your neighbor, how about you guys socially distance and go for a walk together or whatever the case might be? Share a meal, prepare some food for them, or, give them access to a certain book or whatever the case might be. There's so many things we can proactively do to serve and help other people. We've become so detached. So part of the solution, again, is understanding we didn't get here overnight. We've been as I said at the very beginning, a ticking time bomb, whether it's our education system. If people are wondering, why are we so compliant? Why are we so illogical? Where's our critical thinking? Yeah, this is how we're, quote, educated in our culture today. And the kids that stick out, the kids that don't want to sit still, oh, we got drugs for them. And again, this isn't that they're bad people, the parents aren't bad people. They want their child to succeed. And this is all in the framing, all right? So the education system, our food system, our healthcare system, our system of politics, all these things, these kind of energies that are governing things around us. Understand, number one, none of those things are your authority. You are your authority. So how do we fix this? Number one, understanding you are your authority, number one. Number two, find a way to serve. This is where we can build some muscle with it, even if it's somebody who's, quote, on the other side. Mm-hmm. Extend some compassion. Like you mentioned, really think about putting yourself in their shoes, see from their perspective. And I promise you, if you actually do that, you're going to find some good. You're going to find some connective tissue.
Yep.
And here's what happens is you find an inroads. Now I'm not saying you have to do this all the time for everybody, but if you practice this, it makes you immensely stronger in being able to do this work. So find a way to serve, because here's the crazy thing that it's also really special and amazing. What if you inspire one person or 100 people to improve their health and their empowerment and their sovereignty, and not to be dependent on all these systems that have kept us sick and disempowered? What if each person impacted 100 people or 10 people, just 10 people? What if each person impacted one person? We have a revolution overnight, just one person. But we have the capacity now to affect 10, 20, in your case, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, right? We have the capacity. This is what I'm saying, how quickly this can happen, but the tenets are very basic. All right. Here's one more, and I can keep going with all these different steps that we can do, but one more. We have to stop feeding the system. It exists. All of these pillars exist because they're well funded and they're thriving. The money is in new drugs. This is why an older effective drug, maybe in some context, based on some clinical studies, might be completely ignored or censored, versus a new drug where you can make billions in profit. If we're not participating in the system, you become sovereign. I'm not talking about the new stuff. So let's not get into that. Which, again, it's not to say you have to also, even with that, whatever side you believe, there's value on both sides. So we have to have that position. But what I'm saying is, if you can ensure that you and your family are not destined or dependent upon metformin to manage your blood sugar, and a statin for your cholesterol, and lisinopril and Celebrex, if you can make sure that you're not dependent on that system, you pull away energy for the system to exist. The solution really is having healthy people. The whole thing would collapse overnight. Not literally overnight, because that's also a big part of the conversation. Early was we can't get people healthier overnight. You're right, with this focus on health is the way forward, but we can't get people healthy overnight. People were saying this shit to me back in April and March of 2020. And I saw the data. I saw Italy. I was like, we're in trouble. Here in the U.S., we're in trouble. Sure enough, 95% of folks we've lost, according to the CDC. Again, there's a lot of controversy around that, but the CDC, 95% of the folks we lost had an average of 4 pre-existing chronic diseases and or comorbidities. Okay, just to be clear. And the number one, obesity. Second leading one, cause of death, anxiety and fear. Go figure. Yeah. So that's the last part I'll share is, if anything, regardless of the decision somebody makes with their health, what decision they make with their politics, if you can encourage somebody that you love, to tap into another sense of authority and information, because most people, honestly, unfortunately, their television has become their altar.
Yep.
It's become their guiding light and their North Star on what to do with their lives.
Yeah, everyone has a religion, even if you don't, if you're whatever your thing is, you your religion becomes the thing that you pay the most attention to. That is your idol.
That's it. So what if you could help one person, a family member, maybe you're at odds with, or maybe, you just want to help and support and serve. And this is all talking about working on you, still finding ways to get through and to do these things, but to help to move away from fear, because fear is what got them in this in the first place. If they're in a place of, again, being manipulated or in a place of suffering based on fear, which is literally is killing people. So what can you do to help? And this is leveraging personal psychology of you and that person. So maybe you can find a way to direct them to something that is more empowering for their altar. Maybe they lost track of that. Maybe it's love. Maybe it's their religion. Maybe whatever it is. It's just like your God has become, the news anchor, whoever. I don't want to drop any names out here, but that's the person you're trusting with your life, really. So help folks to get out of fear and into empowerment. We can start making decisions collectively better and have more compassion and cohesiveness if we can get folks out of fear. We can get folks talking. And it is easier if you're healthy. It is easier if your brain is healthy. It's not a prerequisite. But any of those and all of those things are how we can start to chip away at this crazy system that exists right now, and just help to get the light in for people, their collective armor that they have up. And eventually the light is going to break through. And we're all going to be walking around here like Aaron and just being a fucking amazing. And, and I just want to thank you, man, because every time I talk with you, I talk about things that are just, these are things that I don't outpicture. It might be an essence in some of the work I'm doing, but I don't articulate them, so I'm grateful for that, because, I don't think enough people are focused on what we can actually do today. And I try to weave that in after everything that I do, whether I'm creating a show or whether I'm creating, writing books, whatever it is. But, there's a lot of focus on the problem. And this is just the truth. Last thing I'll say is it deserves a lot of focus, because the problem is that the problem isn't the problem. And so calling it out, actually shining a light on what the real problem is, that's how we can actually start to address it and solve it. But packaged with that, we've got to come with, here's what we can do about it. So it's an exciting time to be alive. I mean, no one said this was going to be easy. And I think we've got some beautiful days ahead, better days ahead, but it can get a lot tougher, in the interim. And we're perfectly qualified to make it through any obstacle that we face.
Yeah, I like the idea of, I got this from, many people have said this in various different ways, but Mike Tyson, he was talking about how he needs to be hated. He needs someone to spit on him and, call him a piece of shit. And in order for him to get mad enough to do anything, to work out, to train, to become fucking Mike Tyson. So it's like being able to alchemize that negativity or vitriol, whatever it may be. It's your processing system of the way that you digest what's happening. Everything is just happening, and then your option or availability is to choose the way that you decipher it and interpret it for yourself. And then the other thing, to juxtapose Mike Tyson and Ram Dass, Ram Dass had a thing where he said, who you think you are is vulnerable, and who you are is invulnerable. And I think that so much of that comes back to all of the psychosomatic, conversation from before, of how our thoughts and feelings, they inform the way that we produce ourselves. And so by taking the time to intentionally elect to remove yourself from the fear blanket, the fear cycle, even though it feels good, it's addictive to be in that. To intentionally take time to tap into that part of yourself that truly is invulnerable, and then the other part is, like, I think that kind of reinterpreting what you're saying is like something that I find valuable is being so good that you're undeniable. And I got that from somebody else as well. And it's, again, paraphrase, however, whoever that was, however they said it, it was something, probably more eloquent. But I think that's all you can do. Be so fucking good that you're undeniable. And then from there, it's like vaccine, no vaccine, like take both parties, all the camps, do that. Then whatever your religious, political, if you're doing that you're so good that you're undeniable, that's the free market. And then cool, like whatever comes up, then that's we'll follow that. And so if you're the person that feels like maybe you've adapted some of those learned helplessness traits, it's just like Mike Tyson, Ram Dass, and whoever said the undeniable quote. Bam.
Bam. That's it. I love it.
Where could people go to get more of, where would you like to point humans from here? I appreciate you so much making time to do this, by the way.
Oh, man. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. So folks can find me where they're listening to this. They can find the Model Health Show. Is my show. I've had you on, of course. And this is the thing. I only bring on the best of the best in their respective fields, and you have created a category for yourself that is so unique and powerful. It's remarkable. It's really remarkable. And also I do master classes on particular subjects. So my show is a little unique in that, so if it is, for example, with obesity being the leading risk factor for death with this current condition, why? Let's go and break down what's happening in this situation with the, fat cells basically sending out a distress signal as if they're infected, right? And creating more inflammation, a pre-inflamed state. And recidivism in children right now, there's a massive obesity spike in children from the conditions and the way that we've handled this with the lockdowns and whatever the case might be. So we'll do a master class on this subject matter, looking at the obesity tie-in with this, so you understand the dynamics, you could be more empowered, and here's 5 tips or 5 specific action steps we can go out in the world and change this, right? And then, of course, just the general stuff that really is so crazy now, man. My first book is Sleep Smarter. It's international bestseller. Really opened the door for a lot of the sleep wellness books and information that's out there today. It's weird for me to say this. I'm saying this from a place, I'm being very cautious to say this because I'm a nutritionist. I didn't sign up to be a, quote, sleep expert. It's just a gap in the market. But, there are incredible master classes of my show looking at, for example, how does sleep control fat loss? What are all the biomechanics behind that? What are the hormonal aspects of sleep that can create such a interesting phenomenon? So we do master classes. Again, I have on some of the best people in the world in their respective fields. So the Model Health Show, I think that you'll really love it. And you can find Sleep Smarter in my latest book, Eat Smarter, anywhere books are sold. And again, just thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and then in relation to one of the things that you said, I had a little bookmark to come back to was you can't change your health, overnight. And then you look at, I know you already know what I'm about to say, but in relation to sleep, you really can. So
Yes.
one night of bad sleep puts a person into a pre-diabetic state. It suppresses their immune system,
Yes.
et cetera, et cetera. So we're so much more powerful than what we think.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's what we think.
Mm-hmm.
And we get to choose that. Yeah, we're very powerful. And I'm excited. I'm really excited for us. But this is the time now. We're creating strong people yet again.
All right. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Me.
Thank you all for tuning in. Over and out.